Hello, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us again for what apparently now everyone is just calling the single greatest podcast of all time, Armchair ESG with Nate and Yates. I'm Rob Yates, Director of Communications for OWL ESG. Nate is not able to be with us today. He is actually traveling overseas. He should be back tonight. So we will see him again for the next episode. I wish him safe and fruitful, fun travels. But don't despair too much. I have a guest who I am incredibly excited about, someone with whom I have had the great pleasure of forming a relationship over the last year, joined his organization, gotten to know, and been very impressed with everything he's doing. It is my pleasure to introduce the now co-founder of Finpublica, Adam Wasserman. Adam, how are you doing?
Hey, doing well. Pleasure to be here today.
So let me see if I can go through all this. And we have a time limit, so I can't read your entire bio. But I'm going to try and hit some of the highlights here. Founder and executive director of Finpublica, which you started about a year ago, roughly, right?
Yep, summer of 2022, opened our doors in December of 2022.
Yeah. Okay. So happy anniversary then. That's to your door opening, right?
Yep.
So 2 decades of legal, financial, and nonprofit experience. You focus on finance leaders and obviously ESG in particular. We are both here for the same reason. You're the managing member of August Way Law and Consulting PLLC that helps financial industry clients achieve excellence, innovation, and sustainability. Again, very important, but also with a focus on regulatory requirements and compliance. You spent 7 years as the head of enforcement of the New York Stock Exchange, and in particular rebuilt the market regulation department, excuse me, and the preeminent enforcement program. And you served as a litigation partner for a leading global law firm. That's a little bit of a tongue twister, and represented financial service clients as an institution defining matters. You were selected as one of 20 executives from around the world to participate in the Aspen Institute's Finance Leaders Fellowship, which focuses on promoting public spirited leadership in finance and society. Again, that sustainability ESG theme. Uh, you seem to have a track record here. uh, Emerged as a leader in environmental, social, and governance issues, the reason I reached out. You founding ESG Encouragement, which was the predecessor to Finpublica, and you're chair of Knology, a not-for-profit organization focused on leveraging social science research to import environment, culture, and support, excuse me, I think I said import, environment, culture, and financial inclusion. You went to Pomona College, Harvard Law School, and you live in New York. And I've read this a few times, and I was hoping I wasn't going to laugh when I said it. Your wife, your two children, and your cavapoo named Hamilton. So I got to ask about the cavapoo first. Let me switch it up a little bit. Um, Boy or girl?
It's a boy, and yes, he is named after Alexander Hamilton. We got him shortly after we saw the Lin-Manuel Miranda musical and couldn't help ourselves.
So I can't blame you there. I've seen it 4 times. Once on Broadway, 3 in Charlotte. It is. I'm a Broadway nerd. One of the best things I've ever seen. But how big's your dog?
He's about 13, 14 pounds, though he now actually has a little brother as well. We got about 6 months ago a tiny poodle called Ozzy. So we have
Okay,
Ozzy and
okay.
Hamilton. I wanted to go Hamilton and Burr,
I was
but
gonna say, did you name him Burke? Because you're asking for trouble.
I really wanted to, but my family put the kibosh on it.
All right, fair enough. So, in preparing for this, I read through your bio a few times, looked at some of the other stuff. I try to get high profile guests, but it's impressive. But more than that, you have really been engaged in this world for quite some time. And engaged, immersed might even be a better word. This is something you know inside and out. What drove you to get into that? What's the inspiration behind the ESG initiatives?
Oh, well, I have always had a strong interest in the G in ESG. I think that was my gateway into ESG, the governance part. And when I was in private practice, I, among other things, represented the board of directors of Lehman Brothers in connection with all of the litigation, investigations, corporate governance matters arising out of the 2008 financial crisis. And that really showed how important corporate governance can be, not only to individual institutions, but also to our society at large. Then when I went to the New York Stock Exchange, I continued focusing on the G, the governance aspect, again, trying to make sure that people who were trading on the NYSE were doing so in a way that was safe, equitable, and fair. But at the end of the day, what really got me deeply into ESG as a whole was the Aspen Finance Fellowship that you spoke about. And that was a 2-year program where we really focused on what makes a good society and how can the finance industry contribute to it. We would spend days reading Plato, Margaret Thatcher, Martin Luther King, the science fiction author Ursula Le Guin, and talk about how all of their writings picture society, picture how it can be improved, and then we tried to draw parallels to what the industry can do to help make that happen. So that was something that really drew me into thinking about ESG as a whole and as a way that the finance industry can really make a difference in trying to create a more just, equitable, and sustainable society.
So let me ask you a quick offshoot question. Just curious what your thoughts are on this, because we've discussed this a couple times. And the precursor is, I think people in the ESG world focus too much on the ES, not that they're not important, but without governance, you don't have the structure to make the other two happen in industry. And I want to get into this because you built Finpublica, started trying to build ESG around the world too. How much have you seen? Am I misreading this? Is there a lack of focus on governance? Is there an over focus on the environmental and social in silos? Or do you think it's all coming together right now?
Oh, that's a great question. I think you get a little bit more attention to the environmental and the social than you do to the governance these days. But part of that, I think, is because governance has always been a focus and has been something that people have been thinking about for quite a while. So that really isn't something that is entirely new, at least compared to when we're really focusing a lot more heavily on E and S. But I think, like you said, it is critical to be focusing on governance for the institution and then also thinking about how it intersects with both the E and the S as well. So one of the things that I think you're seeing a lot of folks pay attention to now is making sure that boards are educated and trained in the environmental and the social issues so that they can serve their governance function a lot more astutely.
So good answer. No disagreement. And in fact, I would actually make the argument that training boards on these issues is part of good governance, but it's a perfect lead into the next question. And that is, what's Finpublica?
So thank you. So Finpublica, we are a nonprofit that inspires and empowers both current and emerging finance leaders and tries to help them achieve their own environmental, social, and governance goals. And we're trying to do this by, number one, cultivating a deeply engaged community. 2, by providing expansive but also easily accessible content. And then thirdly, serving as a catalyst for action.
Okay. And so full disclosure to everyone listening, Owl is part of Finpublica, part of the community. As you mentioned, the focus of the organization, but who's part of the community? Who else? What makes it up? Who decides to join? What drives someone to come to Finpublica and become a member?
Right. So we currently have 250 members from 20 different countries and across all parts of the financial services ecosystem, everywhere from investment banks to commercial banks to hedge funds, private equity, venture capital, insurers, endowments, pension, consultants, fintechs, green techs, lawyers, accountants, you name it, anybody who really touches upon the financial services industry. And unlike some other ESG organizations that focus more on having institutions as members. So having the corporate or the fund as the member. We're taking a slightly different approach, which is focusing on individual leaders, on the people. And we're doing that because it's people who are passionate about these issues. It's people who can pull the levers of change. And ultimately, it's people who are going to get things done, both inside and outside their organizations.
And so, okay, I'm trying to frame the questions in a way that listeners who don't know about Finpublica will follow up, because I do have the insider knowledge, but you described it very well. And a lot of these leaders provide content, which gets distributed. So what content does Finpublica provide? Again, insider knowledge here. So talking to the newbies, if you will, what content are you all putting out there?
Right. So one set of content is basically trying to engage our members and others in the broader community in wide-ranging discussions. So we've had events, we've had panels, we've had fireside chats, salons, cocktails, and we've tried to do this on a wide variety of topics. We had one recently during Climate Week in New York on how to navigate between pro and anti-ESG regulatory actions. We had one recently with a leader at the Department of Energy on how to engage in public-private partnerships supported by the DOE. We did one recently with the Wall Street Blockchain Alliance, which is on the intersection of ESG and blockchain. And we have one coming
Which was
up.
really good, by the way.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed. And yes, so we've done a number of those types of events. But above and beyond the events, we're also interested in trying to address a problem that I saw when I was beginning to get involved with ESG, which is number one, the information is just so widely dispersed. And then even when you do find it, they expect you to read 60, 70 pages on the difference between the ISSB and the GRI, which most people don't have the time and attention for. So one of the things that we have focused a lot on doing is creating a website that brings together all sorts of information and resources, tools, educational materials, and the like across the ESG spectrum, puts it under one roof, and then tries to wrap it almost in a Cliff Notes type of a wrapper, so you can get up to speed on an issue in minutes rather than hours and days. So we have information, for example, on ESG regulation in the United States, Europe, Middle East, and elsewhere. We talk about current and historic reporting regimes. We describe the UN Sustainable Development Goals. We have discussions of different types of ESG investing. And we also try to profile some of the newer environmental technologies, whether it's carbon capture or clean hydrogen and more. Then, in addition to having those educational materials, we're also trying to provide resources for leaders who are starting their own departments or programs. So we have ESG policies and procedures, how-to guides, sample disclosures, and the like. And then we're also trying to compile and summarize as much research as we can that ties E, S, and G factors to corporate and financial performance. Because at the end of the day, ESG isn't only about making society better, it's about trying to reduce risk and increase returns within your institutions. And it is our goal to be able to show that ESG and doing that are not mutually exclusive. In fact, they're
often walk hand in hand, right?
exactly. The other thing that we do is we try to gather free to use tools so that anybody can research companies, funds, government programs, and the like. So we'll have things like the CDP's corporate sustainability index. We have MSCI fund ratings. We cite Wilson Sonsini's clean energy and climate solutions database. So again, trying to give all of these resources and making them at folks' fingertips. And so that's one of the things that we are really working on the content side.
All right, so that's a lot to hear, especially. You think you could take us through some of that on the screen?
Sure, happy to. So this is the homepage of the website. And if you click on sustainable finance topics and you scroll down, you'll see we have key topics by sector: UN Sustainable Development Goals, sustainability commitments, industry alliances, ESG reporting, ESG investing, glossaries, regulation, pay for performance, carbon capture, and more. Then let's say you want to dig in a little bit deeper and you want to learn about ESG regulation. You can click on that, and then you can see what's going on in the United States, the EU, and in the Asia Pacific. So let's say you want to learn what's happening in Asia. Here you have a basic overview, and then you can click on, let's say, Hong Kong. And here we talk about corporate disclosures, fund disclosures, general disclosures, and the like. But in addition to that and all those topics, we have the tools. So we have company research tools, fund research tools, greenhouse gas tools, and other tools. And again, all of these are publicly available. Then you can look at policies, guides, and disclosures. So let's say you want to see what are some sample policies and guidelines. Well, in the general ESG space, you can click here, and it will take you to the CalSTRS policy for mitigating risk, the Common Retirement Funds out of New York's ESG strategy, and information from Sweden's 4 pension funds.
Okay.
And then finally, on the research side, here we have various studies that demonstrate the business case for ESG. If I can interject real fast
for everyone listening, there is a wealth of information in the research side. I've used this a lot, Adam. I appreciate you having it there. Sorry, please.
No, and that is our goal, to make it easily accessible and give you, here's a short summary, a 1-sentence summary on what the research shows, but then you click on it and it will actually take you to the underlying research. So those are a number of the things that we have developed. And the one last thing I want to show, just because it's brand new, is we also have included DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion resources. So here we have a number of different articles on how you can incorporate DEI into corporate initiatives and investing, as well as research regarding the benefits of DEI and different ways to support DEI investing. So again, hope your listeners will take a look at our website and check it out.
Absolutely. And I will make sure to also put the link in the comments for everyone listening to jump in. So first of all, wow.
I didn't say it's www.finpublica.org.
There you go. There you go. And it will be in the comments. When I say wow, I don't want to act like I'm less impressed now because I have been there. It's just become a tool for me. It is incredibly useful. The wow came when I first saw it. Like, you're not kidding, the amount of stuff that you have on there. So I really encourage everyone listening, at least check it out. If you are interested in the ESG world, I promise you will find at least a few things just to start you off. And then if you're all ADHD like me, you end up on rabbit holes, and then it's 3 hours later. And so we talked about the content side. And you have all this content, you have it. One of the things I do like about it is that it's organized well. It's easy to find. You sort of go in, you know what you're looking for. You can browse topics, find related information. But information is wonderful. Knowledge is wonderful. But then there reaches a point where, like, what is the utility on it? And one of the things you said that caught my attention is you want to catalyze action. So what do you mean when you say that?
right now. So we're bringing together this community and putting together the content, not just for community and content's own sake. Rather, what we really want to do is we want to be able to inspire and enable our members to focus on those ESG initiatives that are most interesting and important to them. And the goal is to take our membership and actually let them take the lead on creating working groups. So we could get, for example, 5 people together who are interested in how do private funds report on GHG for the first time, or another 5 people could get together on issues surrounding how do you diversify the supply chain. And then rather than having to go at it alone, you have a group of people where you have support in trying to study, understand, learn about, and implement these issues. And then Finpublica, as the organization, can also provide administrative research and other support to help members with these initiatives. So that is what we are really beginning to focus on in year 2.
That's a lot. I mean, there's a big ambit of what you are trying to accomplish with Finpublica. What I'm curious about is how do you start something like this?
Well, for me, it started through my Aspen fellowship. As part of the fellowship, we each had a venture, and my venture was originally called ESG Encouragement, which was to discuss and think about and talk about ESG within the Aspen community. But there were a lot of folks who said, you know what, Adam, this is great. We really love thinking and talking about these issues, but can you help us do more? Can you help us move from talk to action? And I
Okay.
said, that's a fantastic idea. Absolutely not. And the reason I said absolutely not is I was still in a regulatory role at the New York Stock Exchange, and there were too many conflicts of interest. But about a year ago, when I handed the reins over to my deputy, I said, you know what? Let's actually now try to turn Finpublica into this organization that can help catalyze action and can
Okay.
help spark change. And that's basically the genesis of what we created.
Okay. In just origin story, it your all the work that Finpublica does aligns with your background, but your work experience, at least on paper, does not necessarily jump out and scream, "Hey, I'm going to start a nonprofit." So, what parts of your background have sort of actually helped or been a boon to the process? Particularly, maybe some things that I'm curious in starting a nonprofit, like what surprised you?
No, so I think some things that were really, really useful were as a litigator. I basically had to all the time take really complex information and try to distill it for a person who is not an expert in the topic, whether that person is a judge or a jury. And that skill set, I think, has been very helpful as we try to build the content for Finpublica. Another thing which I think surprised me a little bit that it was going to be so useful, for better or for worse, is I have a significant amount of experience in regulatory issues and regulatory and enforcement. And I didn't think that was going to be particularly useful, but I think over the past year or so, ESG has become a little bit more politicized and a hot button political issue, which has led to various congressional investigations, New York, or not New York, but other attorney general investigations and the like into these issues. And in that, drawing upon my enforcement regulatory background has been, I think, helpful in trying to understand these issues, convey the topics, and then also help people figure out how to navigate between what some people think of as a rock and a hard place.
Okay, that's fair. Well, what about the flip side? Like, where have you had to adapt or morph or evolve or whatever the term might be? Like, what weren't you expecting? What popped up? And because you don't do something like this, I will bet any amount of money you've learned at least one new skill since you started doing this, for example. So, what were the tricks that appeared out of nowhere?
Oh, well, I never thought I was going to learn how to build a website. Uh, and I actually didn't build it initially, but I've now at least become dangerous enough that I can update, edit, and do that work myself, as well as with the help of some amazing interns. Having to focus on fundraising, which is something we're really turning to this year, is something that is different and a new skill set. I'm not the type of person who likes to go out and ask people for money, but if you're starting a nonprofit, that is certainly part of the job. And I think another difference is in the past, I had a team of a dozen attorneys at the New York Stock Exchange or six people on a different case when I was at a law firm. Here, this is a much smaller organization where I'm working on it full time, but I've been able to leverage the talents of a very active board of directors, a number of volunteers, and perhaps most importantly, I've had the pleasure of working with about 15 or so interns from universities across the country who have been instrumental to putting together our content, our social media presence, our website, and the like. And it's been an absolute pleasure getting to work with these young and emerging leaders.
All right, that's interesting. So I do want to get into ESG a little bit too. I got a couple more questions about Finpublica, and one of the things that is impressive as I look at it is that so 1 year since you opened the doors this month, you seem to be gaining momentum. What's the secret? Like most nonprofit, I mean most organizations, most startups of any type fail, and certainly there's trickiness, but you're really picking up steam. It seems to be going really well so far. What's what's the secret sauce?
Oh gosh, I wish I knew, because then I would bottle it and drink it and make life even easier. But I think part of it is really trying to find and give people what it is that they're looking for. And not only come into it with saying, this is what I want, but listen to people, listen to the members. What is it that they are looking for? And thinking about how can you basically create their experience and better their experience. And I think part of the reason I also did this as a non-for-profit is basically in this space, it's a little bit easier because I don't have people thinking, okay, is Adam trying to sell me something? They know that this is something that we are creating and doing for their benefit. So I think it's a little bit easier to get that type of buy-in when you're taking a look at it from more of a charitable non-for-profit perspective.
I guess that makes a lot of sense actually. And it's like it's inspiring, it's motivating, it provides hope. I don't know exactly what the word is, but like people are down to do good. Like it gets them engaged. It's good to hear. So I do want to bug you a bit about your ESG knowledge, but I got one more question about Finpublica. I'm curious. You as Adam, the person, the founder, what are you most proud of?
Mm. I don't think it's any one thing. I really think this year it's been the gestalt, being able to go from 0 to 60, from nothing to more than 250 members from 20 countries, where we've had a dozen interns who have lended their time and talents and efforts and expertise, where we've been able to build this website, which provides people the information that they are looking for in a more accessible way, where we've had a dozen or so different events and where we've actually begun launching these working groups to move from talk to action. So it's basically the fact that we've been able to move all of these initiatives together at the same time. And it really leaves us, I think, poised in a terrific spot for year two that I'm super excited about.
That is actually a perfect segue into my next question. So you have put together all this stuff. Like you said, you've got the content, you have the initiatives, the groups, you're looking for action, but it's all a part of something that we call quote unquote ESG, which Nate and I have actually discussed on this podcast many times. most people in or adjacent to ESG kind of have an idea of what it is. I still have yet to find someone who can really define it other than to say environmental social governance. But we understand it's this part of this push to sort of get the market participants, the relevant market participants, to move forward in a better way. And it's to drive value and values. Serious people in ESG are not out here saying we need to shut fossil fuels down tomorrow. When we talk about a transition, it's one that involves economic benefits for everyone. We don't want to put people into poverty. We don't want to see anyone freezing. What we want to do is, for most of us, I know my motivation is I want to see my children, and if it ends up that way, my grandchildren have the same opportunities on this planet that I did in the same way that I did. Um, where do you see ESG going sort of in the immediate future? Like what's next on the horizon, and how do you fit Finpublica into that?
Well, I think one thing which is important is to view it intersectionally, as opposed to just separate E, separate S, and separate G, and recognize that they all affect one another. So let's say you are shutting down a coal plant in West Virginia. You have to recognize that that may have a social impact on the people who are their employees and are relying it on for their income. So one of the then key things that you need to do is basically work on building the new clean energy plant in that same location so that those people have new jobs that they can go to and provide them with the training and the resources so that they are able to do so. So I think that intersectionality is going to be very, very important for the long term. In the immediate term, I know a lot of times when we think about ESG, we often think about the E and the environment. But I think in the next year or so, there's going to be a lot of focus as well on a certain part of the social, which is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think in the wake of the Supreme Court's case striking down affirmative action at universities, in the wake of certain litigation against funds for example, giving grants to women of color, I think the environment for DE&I has gotten a little bit more challenging. So one of the things that I think is going to be important is to focus on this issue and how we can work with members, especially from underserved communities, to see how we can continue to promote these efforts and promote a more just and equitable society. And at Finpublica, we're in a lot of conversations with people to see how we can be part of that process.
So a lot to unpack there. I love your West Virginia example. Nate and I have actually discussed this in detail in the podcast. If you shut down a coal mine in West Virginia and move to some sort of non-greenhouse gas emissions energy um, generation in some other part of the country, you haven't really done something good. You've just taken a problem from one person and created it for another, like a different problem for another person. That's not what is at the core, I think, of the ESG movement, is not to transfer problems and create economic hardship. If you find a coal miner in West Virginia who had a really good job and you destroy that job, that person cares about putting food on the table for his or her family, not about, an existential crisis that's 50 years down the road, perhaps. And there's nothing irrational or illogical about that. So what you said is exactly right. Like, identify the outcomes and then address the negative outcomes in a way that helps everyone. It shouldn't be difficult, but sometimes we like to make it difficult. We all like to have this all or nothing think, and there's the politicization, and you start.
Right. And I think one of the things that we can really do in order to encourage thinking that way is by thinking about the P, which is the people, and thinking, how does the environment impact the people? How does the social impact the people? And by putting people first, or at least in the forefront of our minds, it makes sure that we think about it in a more practical way on what is this going to do to the individual and
Absolutely.
communities, and not just in a more esoteric sense.
That's one of the things I always like to say about like climate change is not going to destroy the planet. The planet's going to be fine. It's going to hurt people. And we sort of get lost in this big, almost hyperbolic rhetoric that I don't know, it doesn't serve anyone. But so then you dove into the social side of it. So we had Liz Simi from Honey Tree Investments on a couple of weeks ago, and she was really talking about this and how some of the DEI stuff has really failed in its original mission. So when you talk about an underserved community, what was the example? She said there were a bunch of tech companies who hired a whole bunch of Black engineers, and those engineers had all quit within a year. And she was very, and she's way smarter than I am. So, but just getting into sort of the specifics of meaningful change and useful change with support and a goal as opposed to window dressing. And I thought that was really interesting because with the Finpublica groups, and again, full disclosure, I have been a part of some of these discussions on the governance changes that Finpublica is working on in Africa. You're really working for meaningful change. Um, can you talk a little bit more about some of those initiatives and which ones are gaining traction and how you're looking for meaningful change, again, not window dressing?
No, and I think what we're looking to do is basically not come up with the ideas ourselves, but let's basically find out what our members are excited about and what do they want to focus on. So we have a group of almost 40 members from Africa who are very, very involved. It's actually, I think, our second largest region after the United States. And
I can second that.
and so we've actually created two working groups to focus on our first two initiatives from that region. And one is taking a look at the state of ESG regulation on the continent. What are some of the players who are doing really well in the space doing? And how are those ideas working? And then we can take some of those ideas and perhaps lobby on their behalf at some of the countries that may be not as far ahead. But rather than coming to them and saying, here is something that worked in Europe or something that worked in the United States, we'll be able to say, this is something that has worked far closer to home. So that's one of our working groups. We have another one where we're trying to focus on and narrow down from a few different potential initiatives, and some that are in the running include basically working to help SMEs, small and medium enterprises on the continent, integrate ESG. And we're also in talks about a pilot program focusing on how to help smallhold farmers gain more access and easier access to capital. So these are our first set of initiatives. We're really excited, but one of the things that we want to do in 2024 is come up with several more of these programs. Some will be global and some will be back home, for at least me, here in the United States.
So that's a really good segue into my next question. Talking about 2024, what does overall a successful 2024 look like for Finpublica? What are your goals? Obviously, you have some in mind. And then what are your stretch goals? What does a really successful 2024 look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, first off, we would love to continue our momentum and increasing our membership. We would love to double or even triple our membership in 2024. That would bring us to about 750 members. And we want to do that not just because for the sake of having more members, but it basically allows us to have a greater impact and then also a even stronger community that can make change by working together. Second thing we would love to do is focus even more on fundraising and be able to raise a year or two worth of operating income in order to make the enterprise even more sustainable on a going forward basis. And then third, we want to turn a lot of time and attention to the initiatives and work with our members to come up with what are the projects that they would like to move forward, and do whatever is within our power in order to bring together teams to help them on achieving those goals.
All right, so that's pretty ambitious. Um, so that's 2024. The topic or title of this podcast, I haven't exactly worked it out. It is the future of ESG and how does Finpublica fit in. So what comes after that? Like, what are we looking at 3 years, 5 years, 10 years? And when I ask that question, I'm very curious what that looks like. What does success look like? I should say from an ESG perspective and a Finpublica perspective, and how do they intertwine?
Well, I think right now, ESG is still sort of seen as a niche issue. And so you might have what is an ESG fund, or whether it's a mutual fund or private equity, or you may have folks just focusing on a ESG report that just focuses on what they're doing to save the environment. And I think that's good, but what's going to be really important is that it is basically broadened, and that it isn't just a niche issue, but it is something that is really a lot more mainstream and just becomes part of what is business as usual within corporate America and within the financial industry or within the industry globally. And that doesn't mean that every fund is going to be an ESG fund, or every company is going to be trying to come up with a new clean energy technology. But what it means is that every firm can consider and think about and then integrate into their own business environmental, social, and governance issues, and that they can consider these issues and how they can be used to help their shareholders, their customers, their employees, and their communities. And I would love to see Finpublica be a major part of helping to make that happen.
It's really good to hear you say that. Something else that Nate and I talk about a lot is getting ESG into the mainstream. And we've had guests, Judy McNary talked about ESG as a success story. The topic with Liz Simi where ESG is already part of the mainstream. And I think the way to do it is not people who are selling ESG as a financial advantage are probably doing themselves a disservice right now. What I would rather argue is that ESG is another useful metric from a financial perspective purely, the same way any other metric is. It represents good governance, it represents public interest, it represents a responsible board, it represents a nimble board, it represents often potential more consumers or customers, depending on what industry you're in. And so the positives flow from there. All we need is these ESG considerations to be part of that regular discussion and equation. And then right now, and again, I should add the caveat that it is becoming more prominent. So you're not always doing this. But the problem has been that if you wanted to invest your values, you were doing it at a much greater risk of losing money. And that's that's a strong disincentive. If you could invest your values and just have equal risk of losing or making money, people are going to invest their values. And as more people start to do that, the market actually encourages the change, and it becomes, self-propelling. And so I'm trying to build a positive note because I'm curious, as someone who is so immersed in this world, what gives you hope?
I think what gives me hope is, first off, I think we are seeing a significant amount of progress being made. I think that ESG has really become a major part of the discussion at corporations, at funds. And I think you have people thinking about and talking about the issues, both here in the United States as well as globally. I think globally, especially in Europe and elsewhere, it is something that is top of a lot of people's minds, and they see it as a basically just the next step in what is going to be their future and all of our collective future. I think the other thing that really gives me hope is, like I said, I've been working with a lot of college students, and they are so incredibly impressive. They're intelligent, they're talented, they're informed, and they are passionate about creating a more just and sustainable world. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they were saying, who works for a investment bank, and they were saying that about 40% of their applicants are saying they want to do something that is ESG related. So I think this next generation is on the right path and is really going to be instrumental to making real and meaningful change.
All right, that's a good answer. Then on the flip side, what are the hurdles you see? I know we talked about the politicization.
Well, I think politicization, at least in the United States, is a short-term hurdle. And it's sad because I don't think it really should be a political issue. At the end of the day, as we discussed, ESG is about identifying risks and identifying opportunities and working those into your business. And if climate change is resulting in more hurricanes in Florida and the inability for homes to get an insurance, that's an issue that I think people need to think about and consider as part of various business models. But I'm hoping that even though it's a political issue today, it isn't something that I think mainstream voters are really focusing on. And so I'm cautiously optimistic that this will be a little bit of a flash in the pan. And again, even insofar as it's an issue in the United States, I think the ship has definitely sailed in the rest of the world, and we live in a global economy. And I think being part of the global economy means that we're all going to have to consider these types of issues on a going forward basis.
All right, fair enough. No arguments here. Good answer. So again, thank you very much for being on. Full disclaimer, once again, for everyone listening, this is not my first conversation with Adam. Always a great conversation. Great to talk to him. I really appreciate your time here, and I do want to be respectful of it. So last question for everyone listening, everyone inspired by the conversation, how can people get involved?
No, thank you. So if you are a current or an emerging finance leader, and by finance, we define that very, very broadly, we would welcome to have you join the organization. So on our membership website, here you'll see the text about, do you want to join on membership? And then as you scroll down, you will see a box that allows you to click on it and begin putting in your information in order to join the organization. So again, if this is something that interests you, I hope you will do so. Registration is currently complimentary, so there's no cost. We're really just looking to create a big tent of people and invite them into the conversation on how finance can lead to a more sustainable future.
And that's for everyone listening. I encourage you to do so. There's no downside. Like Adam said, it doesn't cost anything right now, but there's lots to gain, lots to contribute, lots to share. Adam, it is always fascinating talking to you, constantly inspired by everything you're doing, and I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming on.
No, thank you, Rob. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and thanks to you and to all Owl ESG for having me here today. I really appreciate it.
Of course, of course. For everyone listening, thank you so much. Remember, like and subscribe. I have to remind myself to say that every time, but like and subscribe, please. For comments, questions, feedback, and all hate mail, communications at owlesg.com. Thank you again. Looking forward to talking to you again soon. Have a wonderful rest of your day.